Welcome to Journey Through the Gate, your paranormal portal podcast, as we delve into the many questions and wonders brought on by the supernatural experience. What's on the other side of the gate? Let's find out together. This side of the gate, and tonight I have a real treat for you, my listeners. Tonight I have a friend of mine. Now, this is Steve Asher. He has written several haunting books, and one of them is Haunting in the Western Lunatic Asylum. He is a paranormal researcher. He has been in this for years. He's got several other books cooking for you, and he's got some other ones out there. Let's get him on and talk to him. He used to be work for a prison in Kentucky, and he's got a lot of first-hand accounts of some really spooky stuff. Let's get my friend on here. Come on, Steve.
Hey.
How you doing tonight, my friend?
Fine as wine. I appreciate it. You were talking about the books. I'll go ahead and just throw out the titles real quick, so
Absolutely.
In case anybody's looking for them. There's the Hauntings of the Kentucky State Penitentiary, which is where I did most of my state work, and the second, which is all part of the Hauntings of series, is Hauntings of the Western Lunatic Asylum, and I'm working on the third one, and I'm also working on the fourth one. So, and then of course, 4 other books, but we can talk about that in a minute.
Sure,
and that's
absolutely.
It's all through Permuted Press, carried by Simon & Schuster. Plug. There you go.
Now, where can we get all of those? Are pretty much on Amazon? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can get them obviously through. Well, you can get them through Permuted Press. You can get them through Simon & Schuster. You can get them through Books A Million. Amazon. You can get them on Kindle. You can get them on Google. Okay. You can get them pretty much any bookstore, anywhere like that. So yeah, I mean I'm lucky enough that it's everywhere. Yeah, I mean, if you have a local bookstore, just I'm very, DIY and kind of support your local scene, punk ethic. If you've got a mom and pop store, and if you can go there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. A lot of times you can't get them. There, and I think that's really great, So this is the thing. You've just been all over the place. You've got so many different books. You're there in Kentucky. I know you're writing, a couple books on, the different things going on there too. I don't know where to start with you, man, because you got so much going on. Let's just start at the beginning. What got you interested? Is it like everybody else, as a kid you had experiences? Was it, come on later in life? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as I'd mentioned before, being from Western Kentucky, you grow up in rural areas, which, we're in a small area here in Caldwell County, Kentucky, and we're closer to Missouri and Southern Illinois than we are like Frankfort and Lexington and Louisville. So, it's kind of like most people see those big metropolitan cities. That's what they connect, at least the postcards, and see the iconic buildings and stuff. But, there's a lot of folks in Appalachian Kentucky too, just like there are in Western Kentucky. And you sort of have the seat of power, and that's what everybody knows about. But there's a lot of creepy stuff that happens out in rural areas. And just, I guess to answer your question, it was a little bit of different things. I mean, I've always loved movies and things like that. I wasn't as big a scary movie kid when I was small, because I did have some personal experiences that freaked me out, and I just wasn't really prepared for it, because my like I said, my mom's family was from Appalachian stock, so they had a lot of oral traditions and stories, bloody bones and things like that, and that was sort of bedtime stories you got. So we ghosts and goblins and witches and fairies and all that crap, that was all there already. Right. And some of the places we lived, one of the places in particular, we were in town, and we would have a lot of, I guess I wouldn't want to call them shadow people, but it was more like things moving across corners of the walls, up and down baseboards, things like that. And some of it you might explain away to this and that, but there was times when, there was there was nothing there. There physically was nothing there. A rat or something like that's not going to go up and zigzag across a wall, a smooth, clean wall. So, just I was left with a lot of like, man, what was that? And it scared me. And I was the youngest of 7. And it was one of those things you just didn't talk about it. And it was from the, in the old days, you just didn't. Stevie's scared again. They always called me Stevie. Stevie's scared of this. He's scared of his own shadow. And it's funny that in time I ended up becoming the one that was, out looking for ghosts. But all that, like I said, kind of left me kind of shaken, and I started going, like I said, to the local libraries and things like that, because there was no internet. There was no,
right.
You might be able to look it up in an encyclopedia, and for those that might actually remember what those were. But you start going to the library and looking in if it was the 133 section, which was the esoteric, ghost, mythology, folklore, all that kind of stuff, psychic powers, ESP,
yeah,
all that. Right. Well, they didn't push the occult angle of it because it is still a Bible Belt, but definitely esoteric and mythology. But sandwiched in between there was all those Donigan books and Hans Holzer books on ghosts and the real Amityville horrors and all this type of stuff. And I started learning what conventional wisdom of what ghosts are, which I always say I have no idea what it is, because people go, well, what do you think ghosts are? I don't have a clue. I don't think I'll know until I pass through the veil or whatever. But it was a thing where most people thought it was a disembodied spirit of a person with unfinished business, or maybe it was an elemental, something natural, or some sort of a Native American spirit, or whatever, natural force or interdimensional, whatever. So I still to this day, I don't really have a clear answer for that. I was talking to, and man, I don't want to name drop, but I had talked with Jason Hawes just a few nights ago,
right,
from Ghost Hunters fame, which was again very surreal, because I was, still am, and will forever be a fan of ghost and horror and genre, all that kind of genre. And it was weird talking to him, because we were speaking off air about things, and I just said, talked to both him and JV about it, and just said, I'm not going to come on here. I'm not. But yes, I'm definitely trying to sell books and things, because that's how I support what I do. But because I never charge to investigate houses, I think that's just me personally. I don't think that's a little bit of a charlatan move. And I said, look, I know you guys have probably, I assume, preconceived ideas about this. I said, but I don't think anyone really knows what ghosts are, and I don't really think they're experts. And it kind of surprised me that he said, you're 100% right. And I didn't mean it to be adversarial. I just said, look, I just had to tell you up front, I'm not going to sit in here and go, there's a little girl, in this corner. I don't know why I sound like George W. Right. There's a little girl in this corner. But I know that a lot of that happens. And there are people that apparently have gifts and can see things like that. But I'm not going to say I don't have certain skills, but it's a thing where I don't attest to knowing what's over there. Right. And he was extremely laid back with it. And that's one of the good things that I found in doing this sort of research, because sometimes you have, okay, well, here's the Bigfoot group. Okay. Here's the ghost group. Okay. Here's the parapsychology here in regards of, mind sciences and abilities. And then you have this. So, well, okay, well, these are the, ancient alien theorists and stuff. And everyone is looking like, yeah, this is fine. But those guys over there, they're nuts. And then you had this bad division, and it's so bad. And then you have one or two in every group that's really out there, shucking and jiving and making that dime and making a kind of a clown of the whole thing. And it makes it hard. And so you have to really pick and choose where you get your resources and do your own research. That's why I started doing my own research, because at the time there was so much filler and Hollywood and showbiz in on stuff, especially back, in the 80s and stuff. It was it was like, man, hey man, you want to know, go out and do it. How do you learn to work on a motor? Reading a book? No, you get up under the hood. That's you get out there, you start, putting feet to the ground and getting out there.
Absolutely true. I mean, many people come on here, many people I talk to, and my listeners know me. I always say, collect your data, go through it, run it through your brain, run it through your heart, and then do it again. Because I have been in a room with several different people with abilities that saw pretty much picking up the energy off the same entity, but that entity was perceiving itself to that person 3 different ways. So it's like a moving target. It's hard to decipher what you're talking to, and if what you're talking to is really what you're talking to. I mean, there's so many levels to this. I agree with you and Jason and JV. I've heard them both talk. I've talked to you. That we don't know what ghosts are. Do I think that there are ghosts who are, for whatever way you want to put it, the essence of a living human being that decide to stay or whatever for, like you said, unfinished business or got stuck or any other reason? Do I believe that? Yes. Do I believe that other things can pretend to be those? Yes. Is there more levels to it? Absolutely. And that's just, I agree 100%. If you want to know about it, investigate it yourself, do your own research, collect data, put it together. And we always kid here on this show too. It's like, as soon as you start putting things in, trying to put them in a file, with a label on it, sure enough, you're going to have some bleed over into the next thing or be in several different categories. It's hard. It's a moving target. The bullseye keeps moving, man.
Well, the thing that I find is that, and that is sort of I'm trying to word this right, so I don't come off sounding like I don't know, uppity or something. The thing is, by nature, humans like to compartmentalize. I'm not saying the word right.
To put things, I can't say it now either.
Say I jinxed you.
Yeah, you did.
To put things in a order, in a structure, and like I said, okay, this thing has a width. It has a width, a depth, and a length. Okay, we try to put it in a 3-dimensional mindset in a human way. I mean, what are there, like they say, at least 11 dimensions out there, as of
more,
now,
or more, yeah,
or more, right? Yeah. I mean that they can conject that they're there. That's sort of like going, okay, well, I've got this iceberg. You grab this iceberg, I've got it, and there's so much more into the water. So, and I think that's the reason we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot, because we're going, oh well, okay, well, it's almost like the Revolutionary War. Okay, well, we're going to march in a straight line and do this in, formal battle. Well, now we're going to go jump behind every tree and up behind every bush. Well, I don't understand why we're not getting this, because you're limiting yourself. You got your visors on so tightly that, not you necessarily, but just us as people. And you have to kind of open it up. You have to sort of think beyond what we perceive as reality. And I know it starts to sound like I'm, been eating a mushroom or something, which is fine. But it's just a thing where, I joke with, I have some friends of mine who, especially in the day, experimented with stuff and tried, like, was it DMTs and things like that. Right. And we'll have these conversations and they'll go, man, when did you jump off into this? And I said, what are you talking about? I says, the way you describe stuff as somebody who's done like DMT trips. I said, no, I don't know. I'm just quirky. That maybe that's why I never tried drugs, just because I'm already, not that I'm open, but I think I'm already kind of a little trippy anyway. So, but yeah, I mean, there's that thing where you have to step back, and you have to, I think running down that same path and running down, okay, well, we absolutely have to have this reading, or we have to have this and that. That's why I go so much with my gut. That's why I don't use a lot of electronics. That's why I don't rely on a lot of that. Yeah. Just because, I can gauge what I truly feel. I can gauge what, I experience. I experience an investigation more than it's the paranormal side of it. That's why, the group is called Caldwell County Paranormals. That's the name of my group. We don't hunt anything. There's no ghost heads on a wall. There's no whatever. We're experiencing that part of nature, which I think it is all nature. It's all tied together.
Yeah, I think so too, yeah.
We've done a thing in the West, and where we've distanced ourselves to where, okay, well, we're humans and the spiritual world is for afterwards, and then we'll deal with that or whatever. We don't connect with that, and we lose connection with the dead and this and that. And where a lot of cultures never did, and they still have that interconnection, and they don't have that fear of the dead like we do. And by doing that, I think they don't get as hung up on some of the dotting the i's and crossing the t's as we do.
And the categorizing, and the compartmentalizing it, like you were saying. I totally understand. Yeah, I totally understand that. Now, when you were at Kentucky State Penitentiary, now how long did you work there?
Yeah, I was there from 2003 through 2010.
Okay, so that's a good long time. And you have to know that, that's a lot of energy, and that's a lot of energy buildup. How old was that prison? What can you tell me about the prison?
Okay.
It's, like, it's old, isn't it? I mean, it goes way back.
Well, I'd actually watched a show, and again, you know me, I talk in movie metaphors and quotes. There was a show called Tag, a movie called Tag, which I tell everybody to go watch because it was actually pretty funny. And they were talking about synchronize your watches. One guy says, I don't have a watch. And the other one says, time is a construct. It's very much like that. Watch old, but in our human span, yeah, it's fairly old. It was it come online, if I'm not mistaken, Christmas Eve of 1889.
Oh, great.
Now, yeah, I mean, it's been there for a while. And like I said, it's a penitentiary. It's that you're there for penance. You're not there to learn a new craft. You're not there to come back into society. Their thing is going, we will break you. Again, to quote another movie, we are going to break you. We're going to isolate you, and you're going to go to church. You're going to have a cell. Maybe you'll have a pillow. Maybe you'll have a robe, but you're definitely going to have a Bible. And you're going to, in that time frame, it was like, we're going to work the evil out of you, or we'll kill you. And that was just how it was. It was coming right out of, the Reconstruction here in the South. And I think times were hard. There was a lot of lawlessness. And they were very, very extreme with it. It doesn't matter if you were, whatever, stealing some loaves of bread or whatever, stealing horses or doing whatever, raping somebody. They pretty much threw everybody in there in the same big cells, and that was the nature of it. There wasn't really classifications back then. You were either guilty or you weren't.
Wow. And that's a hotbed of all kind of emotion there, and if you believe that, emotion is energy, and energy can dispel, or get into structures and stay in rock or stone or whatever you want to call it, that's, any kind of place like that is going to be, have some kind of activity. What was the first thing that happened to you there that said, man, something's going on here? Did you go in with that thought, or did it happen and then you started thinking about it?
Well, to backpedal, I mean, I had to give a little preface to it just for the fact you have to kind of dig where I'm coming from, to use an outdated terminology, but that's how I was raised. My father had worked there in the 50s. Both my mother and father were Depression era kids. My father worked there in the 50s, and during like the late part of the 50s, where there was a lot of hard race relations and things, it was pretty brutal then. And my grandfather actually was in there for counterfeiting and bootlegging some years before that. So I'm a legacy. I'm a third generation, Kentucky State Penitentiary. But I had heard little things. I never met my grandfather. He died less than a month before I was born. And my dad, being raised pretty rough, thought nothing of telling me stories of guys being thrown off top of tiers and their heads popping like watermelons on the floor and things like that. So I got a really, it was a different time. There was no, I don't know how to say it. Just, you weren't protected from that, which maybe that's good. Maybe it's not, but it is what it was. So I got a little whiff of some of the brutality of the place. He didn't tell me a lot about some of the ghostly stuff there. He had told me a little bit about claims of people saying, because there was a guy, and there had been like a riot, And so they took over the yard. Something about the kitchen. You either mess with a man's mail, his kitchen, or his visitation, and things are going to pop off. Well, they ended up taking I think it was a yard lieutenant, and cutting the guy's head off and put it up on the top of the hill, because everything is, you're walking up and down the hill all the time. You know that, walked up and down to school, both ways, up and down the hill to go to school. It was like that. KSP was meant to be arduous. Mm-hmm. And supposedly they stuck the guy's head up there as a message of going, give us what we need or there'll be more heads on this hill. And he was telling me that people would talk about they would see a disembodied head rolling down the hill, mm-hmm. Up the top of the hill of KSP. So I already had a little bit of an idea, to look at the penitentiary, it looks like a castle. That's why a lot of people call it Castle in the Cumberland. And it was modeled on the old Juliet prison in Illinois. For me, there were two situations that I'd had. One, I was in For Sale House, which was how to describe it? All right, you remember like we used to have where you can put your CDs like into like a little tower?
Yes.
Okay, and sometimes you'd have like you could put CDs on the left side, then CDs on the right side. Mm-hmm. Okay, where they went left and went right, and then you had like a middle bar that kind of held it all together. Mm-hmm. That's how it was. And where the CD would be, that was a particular tier or a level. So you'd have 5 or 6 levels on one side, and you'd have 6 or 7 on the right side. Left side was prison, left side was prison, right side was river, because it was faced the river. And it was easier for the control officers to control, figure out the switches. So anyway, I was working there, and there was a thing called 20 River Walk, and kept seeing weird stuff on the screen. They all have these black and white monitors at the front and the back of each cell walk, and kept seeing sort of almost like a mirage, like heat's coming off the ground or something. This was nighttime. There was no movement. Everybody on that particular walk were kitchen workers, so they went to bed by 8 o'clock at night because they had to be up by 3:30 or 4 in the morning to go to work in the kitchen to prep food for the rest of the prison. And I kept seeing this sort of shimmer. And I was like, well, maybe something's coming off the ground, it's reflecting. Maybe there's a wet spot. Maybe, So I asked the officer, hey, just keep an eye out. I don't know if, make sure there's no water. Be careful. Made his rounds. Everything looks fine. Kept noticing it. It would come and go. Then it started to almost coalesce into almost like a plasma ball. Do you remember, like back in the day, there was a magic guy. He used to do stuff with bubbles.
Yeah.
He would take a cigarette, blow into the bubble, and you'd have like his glow, like not a glowing, but like his orb of smoke floating around. It looked really cool, right?
Right.
Well, it was sort of like that, but it was like phosphorescent. It glue. It was like really bright, almost like a halogen bulb in it. So, and I was like, what is this? So, I didn't hear anybody screaming. I didn't see anything coming from the cells. I saw no wires. I saw no evidence of smoke. And I'm like, someone's got to be playing with me. And the other officer, he was walking up on the upper walk. So I watched it for a minute, and I'm thinking, okay, let's see what these guys are going to do with it. Well, this thing actually started moving down the hallway by itself. Now, it wasn't rolling across the ground or across the ceiling. It was suspended above the ground about 4 foot. So I'm like, okay, well, this is really crazy. How they do it? I was almost kind of entertained by it. Well, this thing kind of started doing like a little bit of a figure eight, and it was really bright. And as it got closer to the camera, it would make the camera dim. Like if you would take a old handheld cam and turn it into a light or toward the sun, it gets blackish. It just overwhelms the camera, yeah. And it sort of blackens out for a minute. Well, it was trying to do that. Well, it did a figure eight, and then it shot out past the where the camera was at, back into the pipe chases. Well, the camera went down, and it come back on. And so the officer was coming down, and he's looking at me. He's like, Asher, what's going on? And I said, that's nothing. He says, no, BS. What's going on? I know you've been watching the cameras all night really intently. I said, you wouldn't believe me, if I told you. I'm a new guy. I don't need to get a reputation, And he says, just tell me, kid, if something's going on, I need to know. It was an older officer. And so I told him what I saw. And he said, yeah, it sounds about right. And I said, man, you don't have to make fun. I thought you were just clowning with me. He says, no, that used to be the death walk. And there had been several murders it was about the mid part of the walk, right? Because he went down there and checked it. Said, nobody's awake. There's no hot pots on. There's no televisions. There's nothing that could have caused a reflection. Everyone's out. I see no balloons, no anything that could try to, because we try to debunk it or problem solve it.
Right.
And he said there'd been a lot of murders there because the showers and all of that was right next to that, and a lot of bad stuff happens in showers. And he said, and another thing, he said, around this same time of night, when the prison was originally built, they did not vent it properly. I mean, if at all. So all the methane from the upper walks would come back down the chases, and all that methane would come out onto that floor. And he said it actually killed several people back in the old days. And so I'm like, okay. And he says, and I didn't know what to say. He says, hey, so welcome to KSP, kid. And that was sort of my introduction to that. There were walks where you would have shadows and people, things moving, things brush past you. You have, you do counts, like have standing counts where the guys have to hold their IDs. You would do a count, like you just come onto the walk, you do a count, your count's off, you go back, the cell where you thought somebody was, they're not there. You look at the bedboard, there's nobody even in the cell. But you saw somebody there. But then if you think back, well, maybe their clothes looked a little different. It wasn't the khakis they wear now. It was a little bit different. And that was just normal, That was and you had to come to grips with that, or you couldn't work there.
Right.
You couldn't.
Yeah, and showing up, you can't appear to be shaky in the job you had either. You had to kind of just suck it up and, like you said, take it for normal. Wow. Yeah, that's just dealing with the living in a prison and everything that's going on is hard enough. But then you add all that, if the dead are really walking around there, that's a lot to deal with, Now, I can imagine talking to other guards and other people who work there is difficult too, because they don't want to, they've got jobs to do and they don't want to be perceived to be, a lunatic or, crazy or, that person. So they're going to be real closed mouth about it too. Was it hard to, talk amongst yourselves about the situation, or was it more like that guy there, they just took it and, brushed it off? Was it that kind of communication amongst the guards and everybody, or?
Well, it was a thing like, the thin blue line, there's a lot of,
right.
And I say it with all due respect, a lot of machismo there, and a lot of, we don't show weakness and we don't want to come off looking flaky. And everybody, especially prison guards catch so much grief from people. And in every movie, there's a dirty guard, right?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks that they're scum, right? So anyway, it was a thing where at first, not many people would say anything about it. It was very kind of a quiet thing. And I would kind of go, yeah, it's kind of weird. And the guy who I spoke to initially was one of the older guards. And I'm talking 25, 30-year guards.
Chief.
And which I call them guard. The reason I call them guards is not out of disrespect, because I was talking about, being a CO and stuff. And he said, son, I'm a guard. He said, when I hired in here, we had turnkeys. They don't, he used to always joke, they don't pay me enough to be a CO. I'm a guard. And it was almost like you have a convict and then you have an inmate. An inmate is silly and doesn't know the rules. Convicts are kind of like the granddads of the walk. They keep it calm. They know how the game is. They give you grief, and there won't be grief for them. There's that civility back and forth. They've calmed down and they understand the game. So after a while, I would start kind of talking to other older officers, and I said, I was talking with such and such, and have you seen weird stuff like that? And sometimes they kind of joke, and then once they know you're serious, it's, well, there's this one time, and once the old timers kind of vouch for what you said, the other kids, or what I call kids, younger officers, would start opening up like, it's funny you mentioned that, or sometimes they'd even go, I'm a Christian and I don't believe in this and that, but I did see this one time, or
it's always that, yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, you always have to have
that happens a lot. That happens a lot, man. I don't believe in ghosts, but there was this one time, But I get it. It had to be hard, man, So that was like your first introduction. And I can't imagine, like you said, you're doing the count and then you go back like you had 11 and you go back, no, I only have 10. Who was that guy? That's a pretty vivid, apparition or whatever to see. But, and I feel bad. You wonder, man, if you are, if they are choosing to stay or can't leave or whatever situation that might be, why there? You'd figure, gosh, they had to get out of there. And I've heard so many people that have had what they call communication with apparitions or ghosts or whatever in prison, and they just either they're stuck and don't know they're dead, or they feel like they're still doing their penance, or it's that age old thing where they've seen hell, they know what this is like, they're not going over because they believe that they're going to be judged or whatever, so you've got that combination, and it breaks my heart in a lot of ways. I mean, I know a lot of these people are bad and they did something, but I'm also smart enough to know not everybody did,
Right.
and some people got the bad end there, that's sad.
Well, there's something to be said for, and I look at good and evil subjectively. Maybe it's just the older I'm getting, which I'm 48. I'm not ancient, but it's not as black and white as it is when you're 21. It's not G.I. Joe and Cobra. It's like you're sitting there going, well, this guy killed somebody. What? He broke his neck. Oh, okay. Well, that's just crazy. Well, what happened? Well, he was trying to break into his house. He was raping his wife. He caught him. He broke his neck. He was fighting him. He fell down the steps and broke his neck. He still went to jail.
Right.
There are stories like that. Now, there are people that are just monsters, and so there's that too. So there's, I always tell people, it's like, you work with murderers? So yeah, just usually the good ones. And they look at you funny. And so, but you got to understand, there's good murderers and there's bad murderers.
Yeah.
There's murderers that it was a moment, a split second of their life out of a otherwise exemplary time. And then there's some people that was that's what they got up in the morning to do.
Yeah,
but
true.
You were
Absolutely
talking you were talking about hell. I would even go further. You were talking about like some people have seen hell. I think I'm more along the lines of thinking we make our own hells. I think these guys, for whatever reason, maybe felt they deserved to stay there. But you would have stories of, because at one time there were children there. For whatever reason, messed up and were whatever, 12, 13 years old. I'd heard that there had been children there as young as 9 years old.
Oh my gosh.
And this is way early, of course, but it was a different time, and it was it was just a whole different vibe, like, even talking, like I said, talking to my folks before they passed, and they would just kind of tell me some stories that was just heart wrenching. And they just said, but that was then, that was how it was, it was just, that was the lay of the land. It's not that you were okay with it, but you said, this is the streets I have to navigate to get through here. But yeah, another thing you have to understand about this part of Kentucky, there's a lot of limestone, which it was made out of limestone from local quarries. 2 Italian stonemasons were hired to do it, but they used inmate labor, and a lot of those guys would get hurt. Supposedly, some even died and were even put in the walls. Fell deep into it as they were pouring concrete. There's no way they're going to be able to pull these guys out and get down there. So they just stayed in the concrete. That's the story. So literally from the ground up, there was torment and death involved there. Also, this part of Kentucky, we are on top of a karst system, which means it's limestone that has all these cut-out aquifers with running water. As you know, everything produces its own current and its own frequency, including running water. Quartz, which limestone has a lot of. Like quartz radios, and it holds frequencies. And I think it would even hold psychic frequencies. People claim to use crystals to cleanse and protect for millennia. For a millennia. So I think all that ties in with it, plus the continuing of more or less anointing the ground with blood. I mean, it's easier to show you in there where there's not been a killing than where all there has been. I mean, you can go through there with metal detectors and find weapons and knives and edge sharpened pieces of whatever. I mean, you could do that all day.
Right.
And it's a real battlefield, just a gladiator camp.
Right. I can imagine. Yeah, I can just imagine. And we like to not think about stuff like that as far as children being in there, but a hungry kid stealing bread could be arrested and thrown in prison. And if they didn't have somebody, even back then, even if they did have a family to fight for them, they didn't have any money to get them out. Or I mean, these things did happen. They absolutely did happen. Or if a kid had to do something to survive. Like you said earlier, there's definitely people
Right.
that have killed to survive or to help somebody else, and something happened. And there's different types of people, and it's the system's really messed up. I don't, we certainly don't have it yet. We don't have it right yet.
Well,
That's for sure. You
well,
know.
dig this. Back then, I'm a Southerner. I love the South. I love everywhere. I've been all over the place, but
Mhm.
South's my home. But the realities of the time was we were just coming through the Civil War. We had newly emancipated African Americans, and just because a piece of paper says, in Washington says we're cool with that, that doesn't mean a lot of the locals were. And a lot of the times, if there was children in there, they were black. They didn't have lawyers. They didn't have families that could, rally and get judged. First of all, good luck on finding a judge that was going to support a black kid who stole from happened to be a white farmer
Yeah.
or something like that. It's not going to happen because that judge probably, or not the judge, but the lawyer probably would have had his house burned or death threats. It was still a time of change, and the dust hadn't settled from all that.
Right.
And that's what people don't get. People go, "Oh, the Civil War was a zillion years ago." Not really.
Yeah, it really
There's still
wasn't.
after effects. I mean, just even in the length of time that we've been here, just people don't realize. Oh, okay. Well, the paper says the war ended here. No. It's taken forever. Even when I was in school, we had just started in the early '70s. We were just having the schools here coming together. We still had black schools and white schools. We still had, when they had that, then they still had boys, white girls, white boys, water fountains, black boys, black girls, water fountains
Hmm.
in the '70s.
Yeah.
And people just like don't understand it. They see like pictures of the Mississippi burning and all that, and think it's way back then. I was like, no.
Hmm.
It's a ripple effect, and it takes a while to heal. So all that compounded with all the other stuff. A prison by nature is violent. Then you can do all that. I mean, there's a lot going on, and that's what people don't realize. You drive through a sleepy little town, and you just think, oh, how quaint.
Uh-huh.
Or maybe you see, X amount of little trailers and kind of go, oh, well, maybe there's meth or something like that, or people this and that. But there's nothing really spooky or nothing really dark here, but they just don't know.
I think all little towns have their dark secrets. We all do, I mean, I think we all came through a lot of, I mean, you could take it way back to, just the massacre of a people, of Native Americans. I mean, the stuff that, that was done to them. And, I had another guest on, we were talking about different cultures and different, there's not one culture that you can name that hasn't gone through horrible times like that. And, it's nothing, certainly not to be proud of, but, this country was built on a lot of blood. And, most of it ran for, very bad and corrupt and ignorant reasons. And that's absolutely true.
Right.
Absolutely true. And within the prison walls, for sure. To walk through that for as long as you did, and the things that you saw, I mean, I can imagine, like you said, counting, and you see this person standing there, full person. Did you ever have any communication with any of them? Did you ever have any to that kind of? You said you have a little bit of abilities. Everybody's got intuition, sensitivities, or whatever. Did you ever actually get any kind of story on any of them, and find out who any of them were?
Now, are you talking about necessarily within the penitentiary, or
Right,
because
right.
don't you understand? Well, we have had things like I said down on Death Walk. You understand, there's been multiple death walks in the penitentiary because as a penitentiary grows, it's kind of like the Rose Red movie. Again, movie references. Okay, well, this was the living room, but now they built this on. That was the old living room. Now that's a study. This is the new living room.
Right.
So every time there's a new building built, a lot of times that's where the new death house went, because it had the most modern accoutrements there and all the, the best security.
Right.
So anyway, down on 15 Walk and 3 Cell House, which was built obviously before 4 Cell House, had 15 Walk, and that was where one of the death houses were. And you would go through, and sometimes do a count. This actually happened with my father-in-law. I had seen something very similar there. and in the same cell. And you would go through there, and sometimes you might think there'd be a person there. This happens all over the penitentiary. Well, you would come back, and there would be nobody in there, but there'd be a Bible open to a certain passage. And I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it more or less says, when he returns, even the jailer will release the inmate, and this and he will be free. I don't know the verse. I'm not good with the Bible. And apparently there's a guy named Kelly Moss. And Kelly Moss was a guy who led kind of a rough and ready, kind of violent background, and supposedly bludgeoned his father-in-law to death with a hammer. And so he ran off, and they took him to jail. And trial was quick, and they were glad to get rid of him. And so they sent him to the pen, and he said, "Nope, I didn't do it." I said, "Yeah, we did get in an argument, this and that," but he swore up and down that he did not kill the guy. He did come in there later. He discovered the body, and that's why he was supposedly trying to help him, but he had already been attacked, and that's why he had his blood on him. But he swore up and down that he didn't do it, and he said, even to the time of them putting him in the electric chair, he said, "I didn't do it. I didn't do it." He said, "I'm gonna haunt you. Was it to the last brick falls in this place?" Mm-hmm. And supposedly that was his cell. A lot of people would see, and I definitely felt his presence on that walk. And, that's one of the things that, that I was kind of able to verify, because I didn't know who it was or what it was about. And they said, yeah, that was the cell he was in before he went down. And that's one of the ones. And before I even knew it happened, that's where they said, where a lot of the activity would be felt. But that's very true for all of this area. I mean, that's why I'm so interested in folklore and things like that. Even just in our own individual investigations, there was what they call the hanging tree in Caldwell County out in Farmersville, Kentucky. And it had always gotten, I don't know if you've ever been to my page, which my page is steveeasher.com. You can see some of the photographs from some investigations I've done there. And I kept getting this weird feeling. I'm like, I don't know what this is. And again, you're talking about abilities. Whenever I would go, I would maybe have a voice recorder or something, and I'd kind of have my hand out in front of me, almost like you're walking in the dark. You don't want to bump into something.
Right.
I had my hand out, not like Benny hand, like I'm going to bump somebody in the head, but just like have my hand out slightly in front of me. And if I felt a pressure change or it felt very cool or very hot, I would say, hey, take a few pictures over here if you don't mind. And almost 9 times out of 10, there would be, not dust orbs. I'm talking about glowing orbs, wisps of smoke, almost like ectoplasmic stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'd wait for a second, and when the temperature change stopped, I'd say take another picture, and all of it was gone. Mm. And there are some photos of that. And I was checking out this tree, and the girls, my wife and the other ladies that were involved in the team, were trying to get it to say something. They wouldn't respond. And this is where I had to kind of problem solve it and go, this guy, it was a black person that supposedly was hung for supposedly talking to a white woman. And yeah, it's hardcore. Yeah. And I went, okay, let me think in my mind frame. This guy was put to death for talking to a woman, a white woman. Is he going to talk to these women now? I doubt it. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, how would these people communicate? What would he respond to? And I didn't use slurs or anything, but I was just like, hey, listen, we're talking to you. These women asked you a question. And I wasn't trying to, I was being disrespectful. I said, look, you need to respond to them. And once I think that there was an authoritative male, mm-hmm. We got a response. And we said, why are you still here? And we had a very strangled voice, and I got to find you the EVP. And it sounded a lot like the John Coffey character from the Stephen King movie. Mm-hmm. And the guy said, I can't get down from here.
Oh, God bless him.
God, and you could tell, and I was like, and they're like, why does he sound like that? And I said, and I could just visualize this guy still hanging. Whatever's there still must be hanging from that rope that's no longer there.
Oh, bless his heart. Oh.
It killed me. And after we checked that out, we had come, I think it was like a week afterwards. And I told the guy, and I said, look, whatever crime they thought you were guilty of, which I don't think you did, you didn't anything, you're just talking to somebody. I think the woman dropped something, he picked it up and tried to hand it to her.
Bless his heart.
And of course it was like, rape. So, and I said, look, you've done your time. You're free. Mm-hmm. go, go to your family, your mama and all of them. They're waiting for you. You don't owe anybody anything. You've done your time. And when the times we went after that, we didn't really get anything. It slowly lessened. You could still feel a bit of a presence. By the time we went there in about 6 months, it was completely gone. And in fact, the tree's gone now, which I'm kind of glad.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of weird thing that drew me into it, because once I didn't know anything about it. And then I started talking to the locals and said, oh, yeah, that's the old hanging tree out in Farmersville. And then they told me the story, and I said, oh, well, that makes sense why they didn't talk to these women. I knew they were supposed to have been a hanging. So then I just thought, well, I'll just kind of talk like a kind of authoritative guard would, And you have to kind of get into the mind. You almost have to profile it, like get into the mind of the situation.
Absolutely.
And extremely weird.
Yeah, and I hope he did, because Steve, if you know me well enough to know I'd still be under that tree going, let's talk. Because I couldn't leave that human being in that state. I just have such a hard time doing that. I mean, that I just got back from Gettysburg, and this is like my third trip there. And you want to talk about trying to get into the mindset. I mean, you're talking 150, I want to say 4 years ago, 155 years ago, Civil War, Battle of Gettysburg. I mean, it's overwhelming. And just being a soldier and thinking about these are, I don't care what uniform you wore. I mean, you put on a uniform, you're fighting for, there's several reasons you would put on a uniform and go. One, there was nothing else you could do because everybody else in your town was going. You had to go. I mean, think about the time, what are you going to do? Right. Stay back? You're a coward. So you have to.
Right.
Or you're just filled with, duty. You're going to do it. Because you want to do
protecting
something.
Exactly. Home and country.
Exactly.
Right.
And if you're in that, you're just going to be everything you can possibly be and learn about yourself as you're doing it. You're trying not to be a coward. You're trying not to run away. These poor people were, they'd get scared and run, just out of, fight or flight. And they're called deserters and hung and usually left there, so nobody else would desert. So, you're either scared of what you're going through, you're scared about hanging or being shot for desertion. It's just a horrible time. And then the battle itself, So you want to talk about a lot of pressure. I can't think of anything other than an accident or, a plane going down or, any kind of massive accident like that where you would have that kind of mass energy, just everybody going. 3 days, 53,000, in 3 days. That's an amazing amount of people. And of course, not all of them died right there. They would, go into the tents or the makeshift hospital setups in, a basement or the college or the, churches and stuff, and die of their wounds and infection and stuff too. But that's a lot of people, man. You have to get in the mindset. You're going down there to talk to them, and all these people with all this equipment come at them. Look at how we're dressed. If they can see us, we've got to look insane to them. What are all these flashing things? What is all this equipment? If they can see.
Right.
You have to imagine that, and I think that was pretty smart of you to put yourself in that man's position. What would he respond to? What was he going through? Of course he wouldn't be talking to, these women, especially white women, that got him in the trouble in the first place. That's, and I think if more people did that, Steve, we'd get a lot more, it's like I said, I don't really care so much about the data as I care about the communication. And if that is a person, if it is a human being, it's like Hans Holzer said. He one of his famous quotes is, I've never been really afraid of a ghost. It's just another human being that needs help. And that's how I've always felt. That's how I've always felt. Plain and simple.
Well, I'll say this. I didn't mean to jump on what you're saying, but two things. That's why a lot of times, I really limit my gear. And a lot of times I'll go into a situation, and I'm not the Dr. Phil or more like the Phil Donahue, I guess you should say. Dr. Phil probably is more like some of the guys today, but I'm not a Dr. Phil guy, let's talk about it. I'm not the Alan Alda of paranormal, but I will definitely sit and just kind of go, look, you don't have to talk to us. But if there's something you want to say, we're here to listen,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't want us here, say, leave. And sometimes we've got that. And we said, we'll respect your views. And we left.
Yeah.
But you were talking about the thing about the Gettysburg thing, which I've never been there, but there's like this being a border state.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of, I mean, there was families that were decimated, not just in like, say you have one or two brothers go one way, the other brothers go the other way. Then you have the people, women or young children or young men or women that were at home trying to take care of things that would either pass from stray shots, starvation, poisoned wells, which happened a lot,
Yeah.
and just the brutal tactics of invading armies. Because what a lot of times would happen, they would come and take foods and burn court. I mean, there's not a courthouse in, I think, especially in Western Kentucky, that's the original courthouse. Everything was torched, be it from invading people or from our own people that took all the information out but burnt the courthouse so they couldn't use it as a like a point of, like a prize.
Right.
They literally, it was almost like cutting your nose off to spite your face,
Right. There was so much of that, man. And there's not, especially in the South. It didn't happen. It happened some, where I am, but they didn't get that far in a lot of cases, But anybody who thinks that, the Union went into Southern territories and burned and ravaged, because everybody knows about Sherman and all that, but he wasn't the only one. You had these little squads that would go through, and both sides were just as bad about that, because you always had your renegades, and both sides would go in and destroy and rape and pillage and kill and steal every single solitary sack of flour or tobacco or anything that could be used, and burn everything else if they couldn't carry it, so the other side couldn't use it. Both sides did that. And then you had the group that stayed home, where they weren't quite, like we'd call now, like the F1s that weren't quite fit for duty or got thrown out or a little too old or whatever. And they would stay back, and they were supposed to go through the towns, very much like a Cold Mountain situation. You want to talk a movie reference, where that group would go around, and any stray men would basically be considered deserters, and they were just tortured and killed. So, I mean, it was a horrible time across the board. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, that's why, and like I said, I don't get as caught up in necessarily the Civil War aspect of it, because, that is still a point of contention. I mean, just look at all the monuments and stuff. But you have so many different areas, like you were talking about secrets, not always are bad. Some are interesting. Some are just archaeological things. There's a lot of places a lot of areas where there's mounds, Native American mounds and stuff, where they'd find, 8, 9, some even said 10-foot skeletal remains, with 6 fingers, 6 toes and stuff, which, I mean, if you want to jump off and get kind of conspiratorial about the Nephilim and all that, you could, but the facts are they would find a lot of that. And, for me, that's why, beyond doing like things about prisons and asylums, I am writing things about some of the different counties throughout Kentucky, and which I love all the other places I visited. I was lucky enough to visit spots in Asia and stuff, and learn about ghost culture, and actually get to visit temples and kind of take part of different rituals and stuff and prayers. But it was I forgot who it was. Write what you know, and write what's honest to you. That's not to say I would never write about something like that. Maybe in time, maybe 15 or 16 books in, I'll touch on my visits to Thailand when, it was war torn and they were, blowing up embassies down the street from where we were at. It was pretty hairy, pretty hairy time. But, just like where you guys, would visit like Gettysburg or something like that, I would visit like Dover, Tennessee, which is part of the Land Between the Lakes area, which is very close to me, which has reports of Bigfoot, dogmen, reptilians. There's been 2 or 3 big high profile cases of UFO contactees and possible abductions here in Kentucky and stuff. So it's I do kind of favor my little state, just for the fact that most people get most of their news from Kentucky on like kind of comical shows, like Discovery Channel, or like stuff like Deliverance. It's either funny and cute, or squeal like a pig, and it's like there probably is some of that, but it's not all that. There's a lot more to that. Just like there's places in Maine and places in wherever, that are just as homespun and as country and folksy as anything here, and that's what's so beautiful about it. There's everywhere has that, and we're more alike than we're different. Not to get all John Lennon with it.
No, absolutely. I was just saying that the other night in another episode that I wish that we could just somehow find a way to celebrate our similarities instead of, fighting over all our differences, because we're so similar. And, it's just, that's the thing, man. One day, maybe that'll happen. Somebody also came on the show not too long ago and said, well, I'm waiting for the alien invasion, because when we get the alien invasion, it'll be us against them and we'll rally together. That'll be the point that'll get us all together. And I'm thinking, gosh, I hope it doesn't take that, It's like, with all this tech and as smart as we've become and the intelligence of us, a society and the growth of humans, we ought to be able to figure that out by now. That we have more similarities than we have differences, But,
well, we have that thing. Well, I'm sorry to go off what you were saying. I was just saying, I think people know it. I think what it is that you have a handful of people leading a multitude of people, and I am not getting political. I'm simply saying, just by nature, you have a chosen few, policing the many, and I'm very much I don't want to say I'm necessarily a libertarian, but I'm definitely more of like, about personal freedoms. But it's a thing of going, we have this, well, everything's going to be okay when Jesus comes back, or everything's going to be okay when the aliens come back, or everything's going to be okay when we have that wall, or everything's going to be okay when it's just like, look, talk to your neighbors, grow a garden in your neighborhood. If you can help somebody, help them.
Right.
Don't put your family in harm's way and starve yourself out. But everybody's probably got an extra turn up or something. My mom used to tell me a story. I won't get off into too deep of it. I'm sure you've heard of it. There's a story called Stone Soup. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
Yeah, it's good. Tell it. It's good.
Well, I won't get too deep into it, but more or less, there's this whole hobo. And because we had a lot of tracks through here, we actually had a really famous hobo called Peg Leg Lock. And my mom used to tell the story, and he would talk about Peg Leg would come through. And there's this family, or there's this town, and they were okay. They weren't doing super, super high end, but they were just regular working class folks. And he was coming through, and he was out there cooking along the train tracks. And people come up, what's that hobo doing out there? And he said, oh, I'm getting ready to make something magic. And so, well, what's that? What does a hobo know? I said, well, I'm getting ready to make some stone soup. Well, what's that? I said, well, it's the best tasting soup. You never had stone soup? And said, no. And so people kind of got curious, and then people walking up and pack from the grocery stores and stopping. And he says, well, what does it take in it? So we just put a stone and this and that. So he put the stone, put a little bit of water. Says, oh, that's mighty good. It's pretty good. So it is missing something. So shame we don't have a carrot or something. I said, well, I got a carrot. I said, well, let me get a little piece of that. And threw it in there. And here comes another guy with a turnip, and comes a guy with an onion. Here comes a piece, a little piece of chicken. And before it was over with, they had a great big pot that everybody contributed to. And then when it was ready, someone had a real good time, and it didn't hurt anybody. And everybody had a good afternoon, and everybody got along. There was no black, there was no white, there was no rich, there was no poor. Just everybody was having a good time. Very communal. And almost like a Star Trek episode, it was like, it was deeper. She was hitting me with something deeper than my little mind could handle, and I didn't catch the nuances till I was much older. And you get different things from the story as you get age too.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful story, and I think a lot of people, have heard it, at least in my my time, and I don't know that that's told as often now as it used to be. But, if you think about it, depression, if you think about it, Native Americans, any tribal thing, any community thing, everybody helps out. You talk about preppers now, and they say, well, get this, and, get this person who's good at this, and get this person who's good at that, and, you take care of your little group. It's depending on how you look at it, that's just what it takes. And, in the paranormal as well. And I hate to throw it back to the paranormal, but it's true. You've got your groups that are going in to get their stuff, and that's it. They're getting their stuff, whether it's the tech. And again, nothing wrong with that. Everybody's got free will. Do your thing. I love how you went in and you helped the guy in the tree in your own way. And I like when people don't go in and provoke and things like that, and they try to understand, This is a human being. It could be an elemental. It could be many other things. But if you are talking to someone you perceive to be a human being that's in trouble, help them if you can. And if you can't, I mean, how many times have you heard of these groups that go into a house and say, okay, well, you've got this one and this one, and, like, how do you know? Unless you've got some feeling in that, you could get, I tell a story all the time, you could get a video of a full apparition, you could get somebody, a Class A EVP saying, help me, or whatever you want. You get all this evidence, and you could put it all together. If you don't know the history of the place, which, it kind of weighs in, but and then necessarily it doesn't have to be. It could be somebody from an accident down the street, or somebody drawn to the family, or an object in the house, or whatever. I mean, that's going to give you some, but you can't just go in and say, okay, that's Margaret who died of smallpox. You're good to go. You don't know that. Because if it is something bad, it knew you were coming before you got there, and it's not responding to your equipment. It takes a lot. It takes a village in a paranormal situation as well. And I love that people like you are out there and trying to understand it, and not really, not really making up your mind before you get there, and trying to take each individual case. And I'm sure that when you go into a home or business or something like that in your investigation, you try to help the people. And that includes the living and the dead. And I think that's cool, and I think a lot of groups are doing that now. You can't really base things on what you see on TV. Until people get that, paranormal reality TV is not really reality at all. I think when Jason started out, I know I've talked to Jason several times, just like you. Grant, spoken to him. I've read their books before they started, and what each one of them was going into it with. And then once you get on that train where you got producers and editors, and it's hard, to keep it what you started it at. It really is. And, we just need more people like that out there that really want to help, and then stick with it, and don't just leave the house in turmoil, once you're gone. You know what I mean? Follow through is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah. I mean, two things. First of all, Hollywood as an entertainment thing is great, and take it as that. But like you said, everyone wants to put their person. It's just almost like, very much like in DC. Okay, well, here's a bill. Well, let's tack this on. Okay, well, my people over here want a little touch of this. Well, they'll go with this, but they want that. Okay, well, something that was going to be $10 now it's going to be a $400 thing over here. Everybody wants to get their cut, and that's something, unfortunately, that you find. And I do think a lot of times people do go in with good intentions, and sometimes, they dangle enough carrots in front of their faces. They sometimes they'll roll with it, and a lot of times it's not an overnight thing. It's a slow boil, and they slowly get pulled into it, slowly get played, and that's why a lot of times people get really disenfranchised or disillusioned with it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Would I love to maybe do something, like a short series or something or whatever? Yeah, I mean, maybe, as long as it doesn't mess up my home life, because that's number one. But would I want it to be where, like, okay, well, we're getting ready to come in here and you guys are going to discover this. It's like, we haven't investigated yet. Yeah, but it's going to make it good, look good for the show. And I said, well, I'm not worried about that. I would be the worst on that, because I don't want to be a fake. Not so much that anyone else would know, I would know.
Yeah, exactly.
And
integrity. It comes down to integrity, and once you get that, I mean, I can't tell you the amount of people. I mean, I couldn't count them on both my hands. The people I personally know that have either been involved with a show, or were offered a show, or at least have a show come in. You see, and then once you start reading the contract, well, we're allowed to fabricate, and we're allowed to, stretch
dramatization
here and all that. And then, they got the contract thrown back at them, or they were already involved in something, and then they started finding out that something like that. And I'm not saying all the shows across the board are like that. There's no way that you could put everything in the same category. But once you get into anything like that, the chance of that happening is, pretty high. Pretty high.
Well, there's a thing too. If a person goes, look, this is entertainment. Okay, this isn't a documentary.
Right.
Just like, which I like, some of the Walking Dead stuff, and I like some of this and that, and people get really tore up. Don't get me wrong, it's just like reading a book. If one of my favorite characters dies in the book, I'm gonna pout about it for a minute, but I realize this is entertainment. This isn't this isn't the real world. Real people die every day, unmourned. So I'm not going to cry about this. But if they go into say, look, certain content has been changed or added to for dramatic effect or whatever, and after production. I think that way it takes it off the weight of the investigator to go, hey, I come in here, what I said, now if they cut and splice because you could take a person, there was a thing, I forgot who it was. They took a guy and he did like a speech or some speeches over a year, and they were able to take X amount of words and have him saying, I think Nazism is great. I think we should cook babies every day. Yeah. Just crazy stuff because they took and spliced his words and were able to make it sound crazy and make you sound like you say anything. So anytime I see any of that, I go, yeah, I would be really curious to see what that person says on a live show or what this person's thing is. You can't, like you said, it's so easy, again, because people want to put everything in a little package and say, there it is. And that's the problem with it for me. But do I think that those shows in hand has opened up people's understanding about it, their minds, and being willing to let that type of stuff exist? Could I have probably had, the little show that I do, that runs here locally on air 15, 20 years ago? Absolutely not.
Right.
No way.
Right.
So yeah,
yes,
so
I agree.
It's good and bad. It's good and bad.
It's changed things a lot, I mean, like you said before in the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about having to go to libraries to look for stuff, and you mentioned Keel, I believe, and then Holzer and some other stuff. That was me too, and I've told that story many a time on this show. And you had to really search, and if you were lucky, in my case, we had 3 channels. 3 channels, and maybe on a good night, maybe one out of New York on 11. That was just our gig. And, you might get In Search Of, and maybe they would do a show on ghosts, or, later on Unsolved Mysteries, and, a couple of those. But we didn't have what we have now. And I've heard other people describe it and say, hey, look, they're going into a castle in Scotland. I'd never get to see that, so definitely. And the tech, we're using words in our everyday paranormal talks that those shows brought to light, I think debunking was even one of the words that, were definitely came off of a ghost hunter show or whatever. And the different tech, EMF meter, you could say that, the paranormal community, everybody knows what that is, but we wouldn't have known. I absolutely, I think that's the truth. It's changed everything. And I wonder almost, what is it going to be like in another 20 years? And I've watched it in my lifetime change like crazy. So, wow, right?
I think you're going to see, you're already seeing it in certain locations in filming, with drones and stuff. But I do think you will have the ability to basically like virtual reality it. You will be able to have these like little small probes go into areas, just like like they were trying to do with the old with the pyramids and stuff. They're sending these like little rovers in and check. Before long, they're actually going to be able to completely heat signature stuff and really break things down and really get into crevices and go, okay, well, the reason you're having this, we can't see it, but what's inside the wall is whatever. There's different structural issues here that we see in the floor in the ground because we use ground penetrating radar, because my God, I can go on Google Earth right now and go to, Hell's Half Acre here and there and all these different haunted locations and more or less get a very good outside view of the facilities before I even go there. Yeah. And, just for the planning aspects of it, it's already jumped up. It's so phenomenal. Imagine when, like you said, when you're in that position to do whatever. But I think before, I don't know, it depends on what you think about disclosure too, and if that's all a shell game or what. But because everyone's going, this is the year, it's like the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, he's coming, right?
I don't need it.
I'm like, yeah. Well, but you know what I mean, though.
I do. I know exactly what you mean. This is where I come from. as far as that goes. And then I'll shut up and you can tell me where you're coming from on that, because I think people are interested, and they have their own views on it too. Too much. I mean, there's been too much for too long. I don't need uh, a group that, I don't even really trust to tell me news, to tell me that they've been dealing with this, or there's been treaties, or there's been, I don't think anything would surprise me at this point, but I certainly don't need them to tell me that there's aliens and there's been UFOs or whatever. They might be able to tell me, okay, well, those little triangle things that you thought were UFOs, well, that's ours. But these guys over here, that's theirs. They've been around forever. Disclosure, I think we've had disclosure, going back hundreds of years. It's just them. Basically, what I think what is coming to is like they just want somebody to stand up at a podium and go, okay, we were lying. And if they tell you that they were lying and they've been covering it for years, what makes you think that they're going to tell you the full truth now? I just don't get that. I don't need them to tell me that they're here, because I know they are. They've been here. It makes sense. That's just me. That's just my opinion.
Well, I think that humans are, man, and I probably sound like a misanthrope, just like I hate people, but I've seen the best and the worst of it, and the most basis emotions of people. But we're historically very, very far-sighted in regards of, and we forget our history really quickly. So I think if they come out in probably the next 15, 20 years and kind of go, yeah, which, I mean, there was a lot of stuff released, like saying the JFK stuff, where, as I understand, I haven't read through laboriously all this paperwork, but more or less said, yes, there was some sort of, what's the word, conspiracy to have him taken out. So what's to say, like you said, in 25, 30 years to go, well, yes, there had been some initial contact. If I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, the new Pope had more or less said recently that there was not a physical hell. Am I right on that?
Okay. I've heard it as well, yeah.
Okay. So, people's going, what's that about? I don't know. And then they're talking about, where's one of the largest, what do you call it, observatories? It's a Catholic compound, right? So it's like, well, why would they be doing that? What do they know, or what are they watching for? So that, I don't think any one group is going to put so much money towards something like that on a whim. So, yeah, I mean, do I think most likely there are some sort of creatures that aren't human that are out there? Sure. I don't think we're special at all. Right. I think we have elements that are great, but I also think that there's probably other beings out there too. Why wouldn't there be? I was just talking while it was actually Jason and JV about talking about ghosts or whatever we talk about, because you always hear people go, well, why is all these little Victorian white girls walking around in dresses? Why don't you have like Willie the 1970s hobo walking around out back? It's just one of those things. How do we know that what we see when we're seeing these Victorian dressed people, if you look at string theory and universes, different universes, maybe that's now. Maybe we're seeing through another hole in a universe where maybe they didn't have the big economic booms and they're still in kind of a, kind of a gaslight, Ripper Street kind of world, right, where they stayed in that zone. That's where they are in their evolution.
Or a time overlap or time bleed. Where there's like a thinning or something of time, because time is like really relative, like they say. But I absolutely believe that can happen as well. Time slips, or like a time bleed, for lack of another term, where everything just overlaps, Like say if you took a book and you've got just these layers of time, you close the book, a nice thick book, and the book is in the same spot. Like, so you're standing in the same spot, and then you have all the pages are the layers of everything that's happened in that one spot since the beginning of whatever time is, right? And if one of the pages got wet in between, you see what I mean? You start to see that one page bleed over into the other. You can kind of see the writing bleed through. I can't explain that scientifically, but I believe that can absolutely happen. So if that would have to be true for if you believe in time travel. Well, in order to go back in time or ahead in time, that time would already have to kind of sort of exist, wouldn't it? Or you couldn't go back and forth. I believe that so many things are possible, man. I believe that we're just, like we said in the beginning, the tip of the iceberg, or just scratching the surface. It's a great big paranormal onion, and I believe that so many things are true. I believe that.
Well, I mean, we're going on basically, I mean, Newtonian science and Einstein's theories and things like that. I mean, we've been rolling on that for like a long time. I mean, most people in our culture have run on combustion engines. I mean, I think pretty much anything that the human mind can dream up, we've probably already made. Or any scenario with other races, we probably already have had set up. I think that there's a reason that you have all these intersecting beliefs of different cultures that talk about, the watchers and whatnot, and they have different names and different stuff. And God, I mean, look like at the old cruciform stories, talking about where, basically the Anunnaki come down and started working genetically with humans. And I'm jumping really far out, but, and then basically
but it's
made
not that
sort of
far
like
out,
workers.
man. It's not that far.
Well, not
out,
anymore.
No,
not now.
No.
I mean,
no.
sure.
And if you went back, if you got to go back in time and you walked around in Egypt in those times, I mean, you look at those hieroglyphics. I mean, you can power suggestion. Somebody can look at that and go, man, does that look like a spaceman? Yes, it does. You see the reptilian type looking creatures. You see the dogman type creatures. I mean, are these just, it's funny because it's almost like a cartoon if you think about it. Like if you go back in time and we're all standing here looking at these hieroglyphics and we're thinking we're reading all of our own thoughts into it and adding some real scientific and some very hopeful and some just inquisitive. And you go back in time and it's just this really drunk dude with a rock, just like, where do they get a load of this one? It's just like cartoons that we would be writing, scribbling doodles, But it could be something. I'm nobody to say, that it is or it isn't. However, it seems very suspicious to me that there are the same cuttings and same markings on, here on this continent, and then you go to another one and it's the same dimension, it's the same cut. We can't do it with lasers. We'd have a hard time, so what's that about? And then you go in different again, you could name it with anything. You mentioned it earlier with different cultures believing in certain things. What about just something as simple as an herb? There are herbal medicines that have been used for thousands and thousands of years on different continents for the same thing. Now, this continent or this tribe might have used it for several other things as well. And then this one used it for several other different things as well. But there was a base reason that it was used. Is it just chance they found out that it cured that disease? Is it just, it blows my mind. How was everybody doing the same thing when we didn't even have, ships to cross to communicate? So that stuff boggles me all the time. And even in different ritual practices. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, if you want to look at that, I mean, when we're talking about, ships sailing, I mean, I almost look at it in sort of a token-esque type thing. What world are we talking about? Are we talking about the current world that we have now? Are we talking about maybe something that happened, a couple of million years ago before a great cataclysm or a great bombing or a great plague or a great? How many times have we, had the sandcastle knocked down and slowly rebuilding it? So,
I know it's crazy,
that's
right?
one of those type of questions. Well, it's hard to answer because you're constantly finding ancient, machinery, or you're finding things that should not be in certain strata because these certain type of metallurgy wasn't put together for another X amount of million years. We got no clue. We're completely freeballing it. We have no clue what we're doing.
I know. But people like you and I, and people like and people like the people listening to this that have gotten this far in this conversation, that are just sitting there, the what if people, that are saying, wow, and then you hear I sat and I watched a 2-hour documentary the other night, Leonardo da Vinci. What? This man. And
Yeah.
I mean, I knew some, but this one got really in depth. And, he goes away for a little bit. He had like a 3-4 year thing where he was just chilling. And then all of a sudden he comes back and he's designing helicopters and, all kinds of crazy stuff. And
Submarines,
I'm like, what
all
submarines?
kinds of stuff.
I'm like, what, did this guy just get downloaded a bunch of information? Did he find something that just woke up a part of his brain all of a sudden? Did he take magic something or other? Did he pop the red
DMT
pill?
or something.
Yeah, but you
Opened
have
his
to
head up.
wonder. And then you find minds like Einstein or Tesla, and gosh knows how many other ones. And then you start digging through and you start talking to other people and, you're collecting data here and there. And then you start thinking, man, maybe, maybe there was something like, alien abduction, or maybe they were downloading information. Maybe we were given a boost. Look at the way we had these certain boosts in different countries even. We're not the only one. So it's just amazing to me. And that's why I said in the beginning, I don't need disclosure. I mean, it would be kind of cool. But then again, I don't trust these dudes anyway to stand up and tell me anything. Because they've been habitual liars since the beginning of, everything written down. So if they did come out, the first thing I would say, okay, that's cool. What are they hiding? Because that's not all of it, That'd be my first thing.
My thing is like this. And again, George Carlin had a thing where he was talking about he was talking to his he was in like whatever Sunday school and talking, and he was doing it like in that classic kind of Boston thing. He said, Father, could God himself make a rock that he himself could not lift? Heavy enough that he couldn't lift it. Willfully making the heaviest rock that's could ever possibly be, then he could not lift it. And he said, these are the thoughts that always kept me out of the good schools. There's a point where you supersede the school. And I say that telling my kids, I want you to get a good education so you can have some good choices. He said, but there's a school around you all the time that you're not going to get a degree for. And so I always kind of try to keep them on the esoteric tip, as it were, to use slang, as well as try to keep them grounded. Mom's much more grounded. I'm sort of the one going, if you can care for yourself and you can find a job and you can find a lifestyle that's not going to hurt you, it's not going to hurt other people, and you can sustain yourself, God bless you, because that's what everybody's looking for. They're thinking that they're looking for a gigantic house and the 6-person jacuzzi and the yacht. But ultimately, you're going to become unfulfilled with that because you see all these guys hanging themselves every day and going off into deeper, darker stuff because they have to find a thrill because they can't find it in the simple things. If you can find a way to maintain your life, cope, and get through and feel productive and not hurt anybody, that's all I can ask for. But you were talking about regards of people getting plugged in. If you talk to guys like David, I don't know if it's pronounced Ike or Ick or
David
Ike.
Icke, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. He talks about the consciousness and all that. Who's to say that we aren't almost like a DOS system computer? We're still very basic, but these different programs are accessing us, and we're visualizing this as aliens, or we're visualizing it as ghosts, or we're visualizing it as whatever. Or maybe we're just part, maybe the id of some subconscious of some vast alien, to kind of get Roddenberry-esque.
Yeah.
I think we're too easy and too quick to, again, put it all into a box, and we like to think that we know what we're doing, and we just don't. And
we don't. We could be somebody's ant farm, man. We don't know. We could be. Zariah Askath says it's all possible that we're all in a video game. It's all possible. We don't know. We'd like to think we know, but we don't. I get that. Absolutely.
Well, even just saying that, and I know you're not saying anything negative, because we talk about, I'm just trying to be human to you. Well, what's being human? Humans can be very brutal.
Yes.
Or we're saying, we could be an ant farm. Ants are incredibly well working together. They're incredibly ingenious, and they make great. You don't see a lot of ants going to war on each other. Their societies are tied. So if we could be ants, that's not a bad thing. But
that'd be cool.
But so I don't know. I guess it's just maybe it's an older I get thing. The more that I pull back. My brothers used to say that we were talking about this and that. We were talking about something other, what it was. I don't know if it was I don't think it was school. It was something about, well, hey, it was like that Pink Floyd song says, how can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? It was a thing like, well, hey, you need to go do this. Like, well, why? Well, that you just got to before we do this. Well, no, I don't. I mean, nothing says I have to do that. I wasn't being a jerk. I was just saying,
find a
and
different
my
path.
brother he just kind of stood back and says, man, I didn't really think, when more I thought about it, I was like, no, I guess you're right. And that's sometimes when you have guys, and I'm not comparing myself to them, but you have guys like Tesla and you have guys like that who could have been so rich and so just a force to be reckoned with. But instead of wanting necessarily to sell off all of his stuff, he was wanting to give away free energy. And that's why those guys, way I understand, stormed this guy and basically drove him mad and took everything out as soon as he died, So that's the thing. Until we get where people aren't dependent on breaking their necks in a 40 to 60 hour a week job, to where they're not going, oh, I have to say this or I have to behave like this because when I say an imaginary God, I say it in the term of I'm not saying, hey, God, how you doing, Steve? A unseen force is there to judge you, and it's just how you should just be cool. Until we get to the point where we're going, well, we should just do this because I think it's better for the collective, and not to sound, I don't want to sound like a socialist necessarily, not that that's ultimate evil, but it's once we get out of the paradigm that they're sticking us in and kind of go, yeah, that's old thinking. We have to grow beyond this, because like I said, we're sitting here trying to shoot, rocket fueled tubes to the moon and to Mars and stuff. We should be so far past that. And I think we are. I really do think.
Well, we should be far past, Steve. We should be past that, and we should be past all the other stuff too. We should be past sending our kids to schools where we can't protect them. We should be past, filling a teenager so much, he's depressed and he's asking for help, and we're just loading him up with drugs that have so many side effects that they can't control themselves, and we're not helping. We stopped helping, each other. We stopped helping our own children sometimes, our own, ourselves. We went wackadoo, on full tilt boogie. Wackadoo. I mean, everybody just needs to stop a second. If you watch the way things were during the Great Depression, horrible, horrible time. We both have relatives that we knew that lived through that, where everything just seemed to stop and came to a grind, and everybody had to gather together. I know Native American, tribal, villages, everything else. There's still towns to do that today. There's cultures that do that today. Everybody helps each other. It's crazy. We should be so far beyond what we're doing now. And like we said earlier in the paranormal, it seems like we should be past what we're doing now. We're getting there, I think. Going back to Jason and, in all honesty, you have to give ghost hunters their props. I mean, that show, the way they came through. I mean, that was on 11 years, maybe 12. I can't remember exactly. But when it first came out, they said, let's take all the feeling out of it and let's just do science. Let's try to decide what's causing this. Let's analyze it. Let's do this. Let's take all the feeling out.
Right.
And then everybody kind of took that wrong to the point where they couldn't prove somebody was having a feeling. They couldn't prove the medium was actually having this conversation, whatever was going on. Now we're starting to get back and put the feeling back in. I mean, I just went with a group that did it all. They had every kind of tech thing that you can imagine out there, but when it got to a certain point, everybody put everything down, and they went with a silent, very quiet record. I think they had, what is that camera where you see the stick figures, an anomaly? I can't remember the name.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they had
I'm not for
that.
sure, but
Yeah, they had that. They stood off to the side, where it wouldn't be like really cumbersome. And everybody just had a conversation and it tried to work together to try to help this one soldier. And it was amazing. And to imagine how to throw all that out is, I can understand why you'd be interested in the science. I can understand all that. But it's part of it. If you're dealing with a human being, whether you're dealing with a teenager who's depressed and doesn't understand, or bipolar, or does have some type of sickness, or just, forgotten somehow, not getting the help or the guidance they need, and you just throw science at them through pharmaceuticals and everything else, and you forget about the tenderness and the rearing and the compassion. It's the same thing as in, paranormal. You're just going to get this explosion of energy one way or another. And I mean, that's just, I know that's kind of way out there, but it's just the same thing. You can't take compassion and caring and that kind of thing out of a human being for very long before you wind up with chaos. And, we're getting into the chaotic moments. We really are. Do you know where I'm coming from?
Totally. Well, 2 or 3 points. First of all, like you were talking about, like with Jason and them, when I spoke to those guys, and I'm sorry I keep hitting it back, and I told them, because he says, well, what some of the stuff you started doing when you started researching, because like I said, it was very organic. I was researching. I didn't realize I was researching. I didn't know what researching was, because I thought that was, guys with slide rules at colleges. I didn't think, I thought you had to have degrees to be a researcher. I didn't realize I was doing it on my own. And I said, and of course, we aped you guys. Obviously, everybody gets their little matching shirts and their hats. Everybody, jumped into the thing. It was exciting, and you're getting responses.
Mm-hmm.
There was sort of that circus quality to it. You're not trying to be cruel or disingenuous or just anything, but it was just like it was new,
Right.
and all that. So, but then. Like anything that kind of wears off. It's just like, like honeymoon's over, and then you kind of start kind of dealing with the nuts and bolts of the heart of it. And you start dealing with, warts and all of the situations. That's where, for me, it all went back to what am I feeling?
Mm-hmm.
What am I projecting?
Mm-hmm.
What am I leaving? What's the whole thing of your thoughts and your will becomes reality. What you put out is, and what the vibe you're putting off is, sometimes determines what your end result is. Doesn't matter how good your research is, or how many lights your machines have, or how killer your logo looks on your shirt.
Yeah.
And that, like you said, it seems like it ebbs and wanes. That you push too far, just like in political fields, you push too far to the left, it grows real hard to the right, and then vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have a happy medium to going like, look, I'm not a big Ouija guy, just because I was never trained in it. I don't feel comfortable in it, but that doesn't mean that if someone knows what they're doing with it, I'd say, hey, let's see what you can do. That doesn't mean I'm closed-minded to it, but I just know I myself, it's just like I wouldn't give a handgun to a 4-year-old and say, have fun, go down the street. You have to train people and know what they're doing, and understand the disciplines of any given tool. But like you said, things are changing, things are morphing, things are whatever. And, just like in the time that we started doing this and that, even in the last 20 years of technology is at the forefront of everything. But without the human component, or what I should more say, the heart, the soul of it, it's all numbers. It's like having a band performed by just robots, tapping a drum and playing it. It may be the right notes, but it's not going to have that heart.
Yeah.
It's not going to have the blood, the soul of it.
Right.
And to me, it all ties into it. Music and spirit, and I don't know. I mean,
That's a good
the
analogy.
further I went,
That's a really good analogy. I like that, because it exactly, it wouldn't have the heart, I totally get that.
I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just because, like I said, I grew up, at least in my area of Western Kentucky. I hate to say, well, I grew up very poor, because I guarantee there's somebody that went hungrier than me, and I guarantee there's somebody that had less than me. But on the curve, I was on that, definitely, upper poor to lower middle class. But So I always try to go from all I have is my character, and not to say that I'm impeachable on anything, but I just mean we've all done stuff we're ashamed of or stupid or just our youth didn't know was not cool.
Right.
But in the end of the day, all you have is your name, and all you have is what your intent, and all that. And I've been very lucky to have folks kind of come that kind of, I don't want to say train under me, but learn as I learned, or I would go, hey, look, man, when you do stuff like that, if you want to go to places, because people do used to storm into places and tromp through places and leave a bunch of stuff everywhere. And, so I was like, look, man, here's just some real basic. It's not rules. It's just, this is just something I've learned that you don't want to get, in trouble. Don't do this. Don't do that. It's best to let people know you're going to be at this location. Make sure you don't do this, just because not only will it help you, it's not going to put a pitfall for anyone else who comes behind you. Everybody who's cool before you, and if you got in those, like, well, man, I never really had a hard time getting in here. It's because someone else took the lumps for you.
Yeah.
And you have to be thankful for all those folks, even way back into the old spiritualist movements and stuff that come up through,
Yes.
As older I get, the more I feel connected more to spiritualist, and I don't want to say necessarily occult and magicians, with a K. But I definitely connect more with that in my heart. So I've kind of got this weird duality, which I think we all do, but most people just don't want to admit it. Where I'm like the old Donnie Marie song, I'm a little bit country, I'm a little bit rock and roll. I've tried not to drink the Kool-Aid completely one way or the other, because I think once you do that, you fooling yourself one way or the other, or you're also just you're not opening yourself up to the experience. Who doesn't want the full experience?
Right.
Do you listen to music with one speaker against your head? No, you want the full story.
Well, I'll tell you, man, I don't know what.
Why not?
I'm not to cut you off, but I want to tell you this so bad. I had, for so long, learned about different equipment and things like that, but like I said, I don't understand how it works, so I can't really tell you what I'm getting with that. If you catch my drift. But in Gettysburg this last weekend, it was just last weekend, it was last Friday night, and I got a chance to go with KSPS, and they had, like I said, all the different equipment. The cool thing was, when I'm, basically we made communication. There was multiple ghosts in this cellar, and the one gentleman went in and he did his thing with the flashlights, and he was just trying to talk, and basically we were trying to ease them in, because of course there was a couple women on the team, and you're dealing with Victorian times and things like that. We were trying to be respectful of their time and their mannerism and where their mindset was at the time, and we're talking to them. Now the cool part is I'm getting full on from 3 different people. And I know it was people. I could tell by the vibration, the frequency. I can't explain how I, know that, because it's my own body tools, that have time tested over, many different things. And I'm getting that, and I'm getting an answer in my head. And at the same time, I'm getting that full feeling and everything that's going off in me. And the one piece of equipment, I'm hearing a yes, please. The Ovilus, the voice is coming over that. And then they've got the thing that prints out words. I don't remember the name of the equipment. But then it's coming over that. They're getting the anomaly that they're standing right there in front of me. I mean, it was amazing, because when you have the equipment match up with everything that the sensitives are feeling and they're dealing with and that they're hearing, it was phenomenal. Do you see what I mean? And that's like what you were saying with that. It was like a crescendo. It was like, everybody getting through and playing their instrument just right. And it was a beautiful song, and it just blew my mind. And I think, wow, I'm so glad that groups are still are doing that now, where they can, if you, like I said, if you are dealing with the human spirit. I mean, look at those guys in that prison. I mean, I don't care there's going to be some horrible people out there that it just went wacky for whatever reason, whether chemical imbalance or the way they were raised. And they, like you said, I thought it was so beautifully put the way you said that some people get up and that's their main thing for that day. They want to go out and kill people. They want to go and cause mayhem. And then there's people that fell into it who certainly didn't deserve the same punishment. It's a different crime, but they're still there. And it's so very sad to me, and I can't imagine being surrounded by like that all the time. And now you also wrote a book about hauntings of the Western Lunatic Asylum. Now you went into this by choice, right? You were investigating this?
Okay, well, the whole, like I said, again, the whole thing with writing, I had no intent of doing that. There was another writer who, again, like I said, I'm a fan of all this stuff from way back in the old Art Bell days, and so if I saw somebody who handled it a certain way or wrote about a subject, maybe even something that's been talked a whole lot about, like say the Amityville Horror or whatnot, Bermuda Triangle or something, but they bring something new to it. And I contacted them, was like, I never thought about it that way. It's really cool that you come at it. Maybe they're from a different culture and their beliefs are different and they bring a certain element from their faith or they're from their background. And I'd be like, that's really neat. It was cool hearing you on that and keep up the good work. Well, it was a similar situation. So me and this gentleman was talking and it was asking about it. And so I ended up talking about some of the ghost stories I'd seen, and he asked if I'd happen to have anything wrote down. So we were just kind of kicking stories back and forth, and he ended up showing a small chapter that I wrote. Wasn't meant to be a chapter, it was just a story. One of the things that I saw, showed it to his editor, and they wanted to release it if I had more stories, which I had a bunch. And so I never thought it would ever see daylight, but then it did, and then they wanted to, so you really kind of have a knack for storytelling, and why don't you maybe consider doing a few more if you're interested? And then that's how that happened. But as of Western State, the Western State is what Western Lunatic Asylum used to be. That's in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and that actually come online I think in 1854, so it's a little bit older. And that had been a TB sanitarium, and it had been connected to the local poorhouse. There was just a bunch of different stuff there, and I had never been physically in there, so all the stories I got from there were from people who are currently working there. And I always have to be careful because I don't want to release any sources by saying a name. People who are currently working there, people who former employees, either retired out or whatever, left, went on to other stuff. I had one story from a person who was in there for a drug treatment program. And it was one of these deals because we talked about the type of medication that they were on, and looked up this and that and what time that they saw this and to their detoxing, because up to a certain amount of time you can have auditory and physical hallucinations and all this, and it was well past that. They were already in the downward slide of their treatment, getting ready to check out when this actually happened to them. So, but like I said, all that come from them. And that, too, was one of those things that are here in Western Kentucky that are very iconic. Kentucky State Penitentiary and the Western Lunatic Asylum, or Western State Hospital, is one of those things where, it was like, first of all, they're impressive. They're incredible to look at. The architecture is incredible. But there's also that, you can just tell that bad things happen there. And like, boy, you don't ever want to end up there. Back in the old days when your dad or your granddad would call it like a nut hatch or something. They'd always say that type of stuff. Boy, don't act crazy. You're going to end up putting you in a loony bin or something. And so it was always kind of there as a cautionary tale. And then you start hearing stories about, well, yeah, so-and-so's uncle worked there, and they used to, have, the cart slamming against the door, and you'd be hearing the buzzers hitting, back here in the back of wherever they used to have the people, and they're not there anymore, and you'll be hearing the people eating in the rooms that aren't kitchens anymore, and stuff like that. And so that's why I went to do that. There was actually another location called Outwood that was about 13 miles from where I live in Princeton, Kentucky, and my mom and my brother both worked there, and it was extremely haunted. But the original facility is gone. I couldn't get a whole lot of stories from there because there were so many people from that old facility that had went on and died that I just never got the stories, because the old facility was knocked down in probably the 70s, and I just was not trying to investigate that when I was 7 years old. So that's why I went ahead and went with with the Western State, because I was actually somewhat familiar with it, because I used to have to take inmates to there and back from there. Because see, the way it works is this: say you have an inmate who's really wacky and is acting up, and they go to see the psychiatrist at the hospital, and they go, well, I think they need to be observed for 72 hours. So here they go, and they get transferred over there. They get put in the observation room and whatever, and then if they clear them out, they come back. If they don't, they stay there for a while. So they had sort of an open door policy between the two places. So it was sort of like a sister institution with the penitentiary, and it made more sense than Outwood, which mainly works with special needs adults and some violent, but a lot of them were just, elderly special needs and developmentally disabled. So that's how that come along. And like I said, the thing about that is, this place has been there from right around the Civil War. It actually had Civil War battles there. They actually had to make a deal with one of the Confederate men, or one of the Confederate captains, to not have their supply line attacked. In fact, they protected their supply line, and because they were having people starve to death, and there were people attacking each other and doing all kinds of horrible stuff to each other, and because they were being attacked by the North and the South. And all they asked was if they needed some men stitched up, the doctors there would help them and help bury their Confederate dead. And as I understand, some of the people that were there were orderlies, that were African Americans and things. I guess they weren't real crazy about it, and supposedly they mistreated the bodies and didn't really do it ceremonially proper, and just kind of chucked them in the clay, and sometimes facing down as a disrespect, things like that. Because most people, face the east, the rising of the sun and the returning Christ and all that. Mm-hmm. So, supposedly there were ghosts from that. You would hear, the marching of men and drums being played, and hoof beats and clanging of sabers and all, the stuff that you would expect to hear, cannons booming. And so that struck me as an interesting thing, because I never knew that. I didn't learn that until into my research, because I knew about some stuff. But by the time I realized that was going on, I was like, oh, yeah, that's gonna make a really interesting story. Because then what I loved was, I'll put the story out, and again, this is what they saw. I'm not saying you what I think it is. I can say most paranormal researchers believe that this is this. Or, in my feelings, it's probably this. But what I loved is this. I've always grew up with an interest in sociology. And I love here's the discussion, drop it in the water, and there's ripples. And then everyone catches different things from the stories. So they come back with different questions and the different things. And you get a really interesting back and forth. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's why I enjoy doing the shows, because you get to kind of have that back and forth, right, talking about it. And maybe they'll bring something you have never heard, or maybe it's just cool. It's just really neat,
Yeah, or spark something in yourself that you never thought, yeah.
Right, and leads you down a path of something like, I never thought about that. I'll go investigate that. Or, oh, I didn't hear that story. Cool. Let me go see if it ties in with this and that, to either dispel or support, or bring up a whole nother type of haunting, or situation. But and like I said, and again, with me working past those books, obviously I'm working on like a Catholic compound book around Morganville, Kentucky, mm-hmm. And like I said, the fourth one's going to be a follow-up to the penitentiary. But there's so many books. I wish I had more time. Yeah. I wish I could clone myself, because I have to slow myself down, because I was catching myself talking to you, and I was like, Steve, breathe. No one's going to understand what you're saying. So I have to go, okay, you're going to scare the straights. Stop. So, but I wish I had like more time and extras of me, to where I could go, okay, devote your entire day to this book, get it done. I want you to devote your entire book to the day to this book, mm-hmm. and get the 4 or 5 that I'm trying to get going. And that's the bad thing, because I'll hear about something cool. I'll hear about the Spring Hill, Jacket, Kentucky, or I hear about the something of wherever. I just learned about a story about we supposedly got freaking gargoyles here in Kentucky, man. What? Gargoyles was there was hand to God. There was a movie in the 70s called Gargoyles, and it was one of the movies that really scared me when I was small. I love it now. I actually got a T-shirt of it, and but it really frightened me, and it was very primal, but that fear stayed with me even after I got older. Kind of like, remember the old Trilogy of Terror movie that had the little doll,
Oh,
Karen
the
Black?
little doll that Karen Black, and it would chase him. And I'm telling you, that thing was scary.
I hated it.
I know.
I hated it. To this day, if I go to the restroom, whatever, and close the door, and I'll think about that. I said, yeah, remember when that little thing was trying to poke a knife up under there, and I'm just like, man, why does my mind go here?
Yeah.
But that's where my mind goes. I think it's just my mind. I'm not saying that I'm bright. I just think my mind's overly active. And so it goes 100 different places. But
they have gargoyles
I do wish
in
I had
Kentucky, Steve?
Supposedly.
Wow.
Okay. All right. Well, it ties in with. Do you remember the old Thunderbird legend, the Native American legend? Okay. All right. They're in the gentleman's name. Oh, he's going to kill me. I'm trying to get him as a guest. He's wrote a lot about old Louisville, and I'm going to say his name because I'll screw it up. Anyway, but he's wrote a lot of stories about old Louisville, and some stuff I've heard about, some haven't heard about. But one of us, like down in the old part of Louisville, there are stories that some of the gargoyles supposedly move around. Well, that's weird and interesting on its own. But then they also talked about in the wilder parts of eastern Kentucky that there supposedly is like a pterodactyl or some sort of large winged creature, kind of like a cross between a pterodactyl and Mothman. Okay. And supposedly it would fly and it would pick up, cats and different things to take off with it. Some people say, well, it's just a very large, maybe it's an eagle or it's a very large hawk. And then people say, well, no, it had leathery wings. And they say, well, maybe it had mange or some sort of weird thing. Right. Because people say, well, some people say a chupacabra is just a coyote that has mange, which I don't know. If you've ever seen a bear without fur, it looks like a freaking werewolf. Right. So who knows? But so all that stuff is interesting.
I'm wondering if that doesn't have anything to do with. I mean, like you've heard all this stuff, the recent reports. If you know Lon Strickler, I mean, he's always talking about. I know him and Fork Chop and all them, but all the stuff out of Chicago right now. I mean, that place is a hotbed of humanoid creatures and very Mothman. I don't want to really say Mothman, but about that size, but very humanoid creatures with leathery type wings. And of course, they're always dark, but that doesn't mean they're black. They could be any color. They could be dark brown, dark gray, but they're hearing an awful lot about it. So
David Dominy was the guy's name. Or don't mind one or the other. I suck with names. I'm better with faces. But anyway, very interesting guy. And I had a friend, Jerry Pauly, who had turned me on to him because I'm actually, I told you I'm writing 3 or 4 other books, and it ties in with one of the books ties in with the Pink Palace in Louisville, which was like a kind of an old gentleman's club, and supposedly guys like Aleister Crowley visited there, which I'm a big Aleister Crowley. I don't say a fan because I don't think that's exact the word I should use. I think a lot of stuff's been said. Well, and it's I don't know. I'm interested in a lot of stuff, but it's a thing of I think a lot of things have been put on him deservedly, but also undeservedly. I think that he was very much about himself and his showmanship about and selling himself, but I know he was very much tied in with some of the old English magic and all that, and trying to reinvent that and rebring that into a new generation. So good or bad, he did try to keep and push that into new areas. But by meeting and talking about that, that's where I learned about the gargoyle thing and supposedly the kind of reptilian, leather winged creatures. And see, there's so much stuff. I mean, everyone's probably heard. Well, like the blue people of Eastern Kentucky, right? Okay,
I've heard something about that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there was a family, and as far as I know, I don't think that they still have the condition. The rumors were that there was a lot of inbreeding, and that was a reason that they were blue. But and I can say this because I'm from Kentucky. If that was true, there would be at least 4 Smurfs in every county. There would be, and let's be real. If that's true, a lot of the a lot of royal families across the world would be the same.
Absolutely.
A lot of bloodlines would be that way. Now, I have heard the term blue bloods, where people supposedly ate off a lot of silver and got a little bit of the residual silver, which gave their skin over X amount of generations a bluish tint. I believe that's probably true. But supposedly they said because they drank from an area that had a lot of silver, that it gave them that bluish tint. But I also heard that there was a deficiency in whatever meal or food that they had, and there was supposedly people that were given a type of vitamin or mineral that they were lacking, and it changed the coloration of their skin. I think it probably had something to do with the circulatory system. Like people when they who was it, Kali, the goddess Kali? She was always represented as blue and having a really long tongue, because in the old days when people would just die and lay out, they would sort of get molted color and their tongues would swell up and extend out of their mouths, and that's why I understand why she had that look, because she represented like a dead person. But yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. There's so many oddball things. There's so many
stuffs, man. You gotta finish writing these books, Steve. You gotta finish writing these. You gotta finish writing.
Who needs sleep?
Books. Yeah.
Who needs sleep?
I feel you. All right, listen. We've been going on a while. Give me your best ghost story, the one that really got to you. And then we'll tell people where they can get your books again and hook up with your podcast and your YouTube channel, and your website, and all that stuff. Give me the ghost story that really set you back.
Man, now are you talking about ones that are in my book, or ones that's just anything?
Anything that either you experienced, or or a story that you were told by somebody that experienced it.
Well, I'll tell you this. I've never put this in a book. This is something that actually happened to me. In a small town not far from here. Actually, we're in the same town that the Outwood facility was in. My father had a house on East Hall Street in Dawson Springs, Kentucky. And this is something I actually physically witnessed. We were living there in a part of an old duplex, and there was an elderly mother, like old lady. Kind of looked like the lady from what was the movie with Vincent Price? The old lady was on the slide thing, and they moved her through, and she had her wild hair, and she was scary looking. She looked blind.
Yeah.
House on Haunted Hill.
Yeah.
Looked like that. And her daughter was a little bit younger than her, but she was still very old. And we were living there, and we kept having, in the little kitchen area, movement. And almost like you could feel almost like doors were opening from the inside to out. And then you would hear like people were pulling tables out and sitting down. And some nights, you go check, there's nothing there. Then sometimes you'd hear place settings, people were eating or doing whatever, and you hear like a light music, almost like a chamber music. We go, nothing's there. And one night it got so bad that we started having things started getting slammed around. And it sounded like something got broke. We thought, man, somebody knocked a hole in the window, was crawling in. We went, checked it out, flipped the light on, so everything was completely fine. Checked around the house. Okay, that was great. Well, a year or so after that, this stuff kind of continued. The floor under the sink in the kitchen was starting to had a bad leak, and so we had to pull up the floor. Well, we're moving up all this wood and look down, and what did we find?
I don't know.
What do you think we found?
Do you find a body?
Do you think we found a body? I think what we found was a large flat stone that had a bunch of concrete around it. It wasn't a support beam, and it was very smooth. It didn't have any writing on it, but it was almost like it was prepared, but it never got finished. I think that somebody that lived there or property previously had died and was buried, but no one ever finished putting their names down. And I was taking a shower because we had the duplex had like a small shower, and so I went and took a shower, and I was coming out, and I never understood what was going on, and I was just thinking to myself, I said, that's the strangest thing. I wonder what that was about. And I come through the hallway, and I heard someone say, Carrie. Oh. And I looked up, and there was a little doorway that led into the other people's apartments, the old people's apartments. And I saw what looked like the old lady, but her face was completely ashy. The eyes were black. And so I ran on in there. I was maybe 12. Scared the crap out of me.
I bet.
And I told my dad. Well, and come to find out, they weren't even there. They had went to visit somebody, and I said there was somebody over there. And so we actually left the house that night. He was already pretty freaked out about that stone. The night we found that stone, we left too. But that was the one that always stayed with me because I found a picture of a person that had been in. It was on a mantle when we pulled an old mantle down, and it was an old picture of a guy in a coffin, laying in a coffin. Like remember, like in the old days, people take a picture of like somebody's granddad or whatever.
Yeah.
And I could have sworn it's that guy. It had something wrote, and it looked like Carrie, but like in the way a man would spell the name Carrie, like almost like a Cary Grant, and it looked like it said Carrie on it. So I don't know. Does that mean anything? No. Did it scare the crap out of me 100%?
Wow. Yeah, it would scare the crap out of me too. Somebody building a house on, how many times we've heard people building houses on graveyards. That's a no-no. But
Yeah.
if you think about it, this whole place is a graveyard, so you'd be hard pressed to find something that didn't have something buried under it. I mean, that's a good one. That's a good one. Tell us where we can get a hold of your podcast, man. You had a good podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, like I said, it's House of Asher, ASHER, and I do it through Spreaker, and then it's simulcast over through YouTube, and then also there's some stuff carried on Conflict Radio, also on YouTube. It goes through WPKY 103.3 here in Princeton, Kentucky. I'm trying to look at getting it in a few other little affiliates, but baby steps. So that's what I'm doing right now.
And you got a couple of books coming out. If we get you to hold still for a minute, finish one, finish another one. We got the other ones are Hauntings in the Western Lunatic Asylum, and the other one is, say the name again.
It's Kentucky. All right, there's Hauntings of the Kentucky State Penitentiary and Hauntings of the Western Lunatic Asylum. And book 3 tentatively will be called Hauntings of the St. Vincent's Academy.
Wow. Okay, I look forward to that one as well. It's been a pleasure having you on, my friend.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Oh, gosh, it's been great. We just rattled on here for like about 2 hours, but we talked about a lot of interesting stuff and give a lot of things to think about. Sometimes you got to step back and think about something in different ways. But thanks for being out there. And do you want to give a plug to your group too, your investigative group?
Sure. Well, I mean, like I said, you can find like Steve Asher on YouTube. You can find it on Twitter, Google. StevieAsher.com. And the team, again, is Caldwell County Paranormals. And you can find that all through YouTube. And like it's just all over. I mean, just go, on YouTube and on, I've got a whole lot of different little interviews here and there. I'm slowly starting to make a mark.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. It's been a pleasure talking to you, my friend. And, keep writing those books and telling those stories and getting that information. I look forward to seeing what you come up with next.
Thank you. And then, like I said, I really appreciate the work that you do. Keep it up. And like I said, and again, we kind of started talking before this even ever became a thing. And that's what I love doing is making friends. And, I know a lot of people say that, we work together, we're good best buddies, but I love the fact that you can meet people and actually have good, sustainable relationships with folks and just have a really good, healthy discourse on things. It's great.
Absolutely true. Well, I can absolutely call you a friend. It's been really cool relationship, and paranormal brought us together. So, it can't be all that bad, right?
That's right.
You have a blessed evening, man.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Steve Asher for coming on tonight and talking all things paranormal, from reptilians and gargoyles and ghost stories and beyond. And I appreciate that so much. As the kind of conversation we like to have. You never know where they're going to go. So, also, if you have your own stories with the uncanny, please send them in to us at journeythroughthegate@gmail.com. Join us on our Facebook group page, which is Journey Through the Gate Paranormal Portal Podcast Gatekeepers on Facebook. You can get our swag, the link to the TeePublic. It's basically Cisco's storefront. It has a lot of our logos and things like that, and you help to promote the podcast and keep us on the air. You can get a travel mug, or you can get a pillow, you get tapestries, a lot of cool art on there from our cover art and also logos and things like that. It's got a little crispy on there, and everybody loves crispy. So that link will be in below. There will be links to get Steve Asher's books and his website, and also check out his podcast as well. And as usual, the most important thing, keep your feet under those covers. Keep that closet door shut, because there are things that go bump in the night.